Welcome to Thinking Out Loud, special Black History edition with your hosts, Vaney Hariri, Tamien Dysart, co-founders of Think 3D. And today we have a special guest, Julian Beaudion of Swamp Daddies, of the South Dakota Highway Patrol, of Julian Beaudion for City Council, of
all the etc. He do a lot of things. So
et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Welcome to the show, sir.
Appreciate it, man. Thank y'all for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We wanted to get together. I mean, obviously we're in Black History, and sometimes we don't always get an opportunity to do our own content. I always say like January 30th, my phone started vibrating off of the table when people are hitting me up to do their last second Black History stories. And so this is an opportunity we have to have a little bit of a different dialogue in terms of, you know, what it has meant historically when we talk about Black History Month. What does it mean right now? What might it mean in the future in terms of how it still instills pride in the Black community, educates the Black community, but also educates the community as a whole, brings people closer to the experiences that built this country and the participation that people of color have had in the building of that country and what that means. Yeah. And how that changes the way people are thinking about the world today. So with that said, what has been your relationship with Black history?
We're going to keep it real?
Keep it all the way real.
Okay, so you talk about the phone vibrating, right? Mm-hmm. Man, I mean, I think we all get that right around that, starting at MLK Day, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
right, from MLK Day to the end of February, we get inundated with a lot of requests. So for me, my question is always like, what's your responsibility? I know my responsibility because I'm out here doing it. I'm doing the thing, right? I'm the executive director of the South Dakota African American History Museum. That's not a month-long project.
For sure.
You know what I mean? That's a lifetime of service. So like, what is your responsibility? The person that's calling me, have you done your research or are you just asking me questions for what? Mm-hmm. Right? So what's behind the questions? What are you going to do with the data, the info that I give you? And then February 28th, are we just going to let it slip by, right? Yeah. Or are we going to continue talking about it? Or are we going to continue to progress? So for me, when you talk about like where we are right now, we're nowhere. We've gotten a little bit of progress, right? I mean, you could talk about the progress of desegregation, going back into history after MLK. You could talk about the progress of some of the politics behind drugs back in the mid-90s, some of those things, right? But man, you talk about the struggle that Black people are still in. We're still, low on the poverty scale. So what are we doing about that? We still own less than 1% of these businesses out here. So what are we doing about that? Right. So there's a larger conversation about what we should be doing or what we should be talking about when it comes to progress.
For sure. For me, one of the things that I'm at a place right now when I get those calls is I'm always up for educating and that type of thing. I think it's important. But my thing is that for me to do this with you right now, you got to tell me about how you're going to engage with us a month or two from now, 3 months from now, 4 months from now, when we're out of this space. Because, we all have programs that we work with, businesses that we operate, things that we do in the community, initiatives that we're working on that could use attention all of the time to drive energy to those things, to be an example of what happens when people do overcome their circumstance and do put their effort on the community and that type of thing. And so for me, it's always about how we're going to broaden this conversation to be more useful in this moment where we talk about, the usual suspects of Black history.
Right. I think it comes down to as well, like people say that they don't have the time, right? And for me, it's not necessarily about creating the time because time, like time is something you can't create. It's there, right? You're not going to have any more of it. You're not going to have any less of it. But it's about being intentional to create the space. So do you have the space?
Yeah.
Mentally, physically, whatever. Do you have the space that you can create in your life to really figure out what you're going to do next? And so I think that for sure, especially comes down to having those communications.
Well, a lot of it, I mean, for me is how important is it, obviously, to other people? And again, you have a month, you talk about these type of things, another 11 months, you don't see a whole lot of it. And not to, throw shots, but it's you see the folks that like, oh, it's not a priority because they have other stuff going on. I get it, right? But in the failure of a Black History Month, like, we seem to have got to this place again. Y'all had a Black president now. What y'all complaining about? Like, we supposed to be there, right? But to your point of poverty and owning businesses, like, the lack of acknowledgement of how we got here, predominantly because I didn't do it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But neither did we. Right? So why is the responsibility only on us? That goes back to kind of what we were talking about earlier. What's your role? What's your responsibility as well? Like, this is supposed to be a communal effort.
Yeah. It's not about fault. It's about responsibility.
Absolutely.
Again, I'm not at fault for children being hungry.
Yeah.
That don't mean it's not my responsibility.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm not at fault for, making sure people are mentored in development and that type of thing. It's not my fault that somebody didn't have somebody in their life helping them. But it's my responsibility.
Absolutely.
If you want a certain type of community, particularly one that's actually connected and has real, genuine relationships in it.
Yeah.
So let's bring that back to now. I think it's important when we think about, obviously there's a history where we've been, but in this moment of the now, in your opinion, what are some of those opportunities that we have? Let's just start with ourselves, because again, if we hold our breath waiting for other people to come, it's not a good outcome. What are some things that you see as opportunities that we as Black people need to start to think about, consider, talk about, move forward, and take the mantle of saying, let's take this on our own shoulders?
So I want to keep it local, all the way local, honestly.
Let's do that so we can control.
Just because that's where we are working, right? That's the space we're in. So number one, when I ran for city council, one of the things that I talked about was building my own table. And I talked about that quite a bit because I didn't want to wait for anybody else. We have been waiting on somebody else for so long. It's that white savior mentality that's in our mind versus in someone else's mind. We're waiting on someone to come save us instead of saving ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. So when you build your own organizations, when you build your own platforms, and then you build your own table and invite everyone else to that table, that's what true equity is, right? And so that's what we're doing. You guys are doing that with Think 3D. We're doing that with the Hub South Dakota, really trying to promote business and entrepreneurship and startups. And we see the need for it, not only in our community, but we see the need for it in the community as a whole, right? Startup Sioux Falls is a partner of ours. The Chamber of Commerce is now a partner of ours. And we're starting to build these relationships that everyone else has been trying to build for years, but had no clue how to establish the relationships. Because it's not their responsibility. The onus is on us, right? Do we want to be better for ourselves? And then I think once we answer that question and once we actually start working in that particular sector of our community, then we can see some true progress.
We talk about that a lot in terms of just a general concept that, happiness is a personal responsibility. You can't get to the peak of it solely by yourself, but you have to be the driver of it because you know what makes you happy.
Yeah.
The idea of waiting for somebody else to give you a justice or a freedom that they can't define for you is just naive in its nature. You know what I mean? How can you give me something that I want when you don't really know me enough to know what I want?
Right.
And so it's about being in a room and being represented. And what I have just come to find is that when I pursue the things that would be liberating to Black people, they tend to be beneficial for everybody else.
Everybody.
You know what I mean? There are very few things that I pursue that are not ultimately a benefit to the entire community. It's just about saying that there's some focus, because there's some people who are perfectly comfortable with people of color having specific problems, but they're challenged by the idea of them having specific solutions, that we're trying to solve the situation for these people because it naturally feels unfair. And that's a difficult thing, right? Is the idea of solving unfairness with fairness.
Sure.
That's a challenging concept.
So then the question is difficult for who? Because for me, it's not necessarily difficult, right? Because and you guys know me, I've always been unapologetic about what I've been working on, and who I've been working with. And so I'm at the point now, again, it's 2023. So I'm at the point now where feelings don't matter much. You know what I mean? You can get past your emotions and let's start to work. Again, we talk about progress and where true progress actually starts. It starts when people get past their emotions and they start to think logically so that we can move in the right direction.
But let's talk about that though, logically, right? Because, one of the common tropes when you talk about a Black History Month is, well, why isn't there a
White History Month?
White History Month. Yeah. Why isn't there a?
Because you got 11 of the months. You know what I mean?
But to that point, when people think about that, is that idea that's why diversity so many times how it's communicated comes with an eye roll, because it's like, oh, we got to go to this thing again, because it feels like it's for somebody else.
Yeah.
It feels like people are getting something special, because in a world where you don't identify as a person who participated in any of these things. It just feels like we started from the same space, and now something special is happening for you, and whoever else.
Yeah, and I think that's where education of what equity actually means comes into play, because we didn't start from the same space, right? So although that feeling is there, although that emotion is there, let's actually go back and look at the why. Why are we here? So you and I shared a video. I can't remember how long ago it was, but it was just, I mean, people were giving excuse after excuse after excuse, and the question afterwards always came up to why. Why, right? And so eventually you get back to the root of the problem and say, oh, well, we didn't start in the same space. So maybe we do need to celebrate this group of people a little bit more. Maybe we do need to acknowledge what they are doing in our community.
And I think that's the hope of a Black History Month, is to give context, right? I think if somebody just was born today and didn't have any context about these things, they'd be like, man, why are these people so angry?
Yeah.
Why are they so frustrated, right? Because there's you know what I mean? Because there's a lack of historical context. I don't know that Black History Month, as it is oftentimes engaged with, has bridged that gap a ton.
Right. Well, because it's become, I mean, it's like everything else.
Yeah.
I mean, I love Target for putting all the Black History Month stuff out, right? But they're making money off of it.
Right.
You know, it's become like any other holiday. Now they can just do it for 28 days versus 1 day. So it's not really living up to its true potential.
Well, I'll go back to something you had said about even what you're doing with the hub is the relationships. You're building those key relationships. And I think too often times people haven't seen the value of strategic relationships, and especially in today's day and age.
Yeah.
Again, I saw it, again, just a generation ago, my daddy was held out of the rooms and all those different things where he couldn't just go do those things.
Yep.
And I think, I'm one who's probably a prime example of it. Like, again, 4 years ago, almost, if you didn't know me in this community, you didn't know me.
Yeah.
Because I just did my thing. I climbed the corporate ladder, did X, Y, Z. But then when you start to say, all right, let me go make a difference, and you build the right relationships to these things, because it's interesting, we're asking sometimes people to do certain things in a certain way because it's the right thing to do X, Y, Z, but how we approach them, like if someone approached me that way, like if anyone ever approached me and say, you know what you should do, I almost guarantee whatever you say, I ain't gonna do it.
You ain't gonna hear it.
Yeah.
As soon as somebody tells you what you should do.
Yes.
For sure.
And especially people, again, who themselves didn't directly do it, is in a position, you want their help, you're going to tell them what they should do and they need their help. But and that's why I would say, you can't have compassion from a distance. And when you start to build some of those relationships and people, now there's no defenses to it. They get to know your story. They're like, man, I didn't know that, because they're listening out of a state of not being threatened, X, Y, Z. Yeah. And now they're willing to participate in some of the solutions to make this improvement.
So then again, like the word you use is kind of, they don't feel threatened. I particularly am in a space to where, again, I don't care about them feeling a certain type of way about what I'm presenting. So people love to hear stories, but they hate to hear testimonies, right? So they'll love the story about, oh, you had to go through this struggle, you had to go through that struggle. But when I get passionate and my testimony begins to come out, that's when people starts to feel threatened, right?
For sure.
And so I think there's also a disconnect there about people listening. Communication is two different things. I can talk till I'm blue in the face, but if you're not actively listening to what I'm saying,
for sure,
then it doesn't matter at all.
For sure.
Yeah.
I think as we talk about with folks is that there's sometimes you got to be a better communicator than the other person is a listener. Sometimes you got to be a better listener than the other person is a communicator. The idea that everybody comes to the table with the same set of skills and experiences to be able to decipher all of that is rare. And so that is the difficult part. That's the juxtaposition, right? How this person feels my concern? No. It's how this person is motivated to behave based on how they feel. Is that my concern? It has to be.
It absolutely
and
is.
So it's finding the space of being able to say, I'm not responsible for making you feel good about all of this, but you're more likely to do things if you feel good about it.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, because it's obvious through the passion that we speak with that we don't feel good about it either. You know what I mean?
Right.
So now we're on the same page. Now we're on the same starting at the same starting point. Now what can we do? Right. Yeah. So you're angry. I'm angry. Let's not be angry anymore.
What do you want to do?
Right. What do you want to do?
That's the space that I'm in. Yeah. It's so funny too, because sometimes I have conversations and there'll be people out there in the world, and to their credit, they'll reach out to me and they'll say, hey, I want to unpack this thing. Now, again, it's not my responsibility to help them unpack any of this stuff. But I do, because for me, I feel that I'm equipped to assist people with this, and there's a benefit to doing it. But what always comes of it is a rejection of feeling uncomfortable and a desire to make me feel comfortable with the status quo.
Yeah.
Right. And so they say, well, there's no harm. I don't mean it,
Yeah.
And it's always an interesting conversation when you have to get people to the point of getting some discomfort. And they're like, well, this makes me feel uncomfortable. Yeah. Experiencing it is 100 times worse.
Right. Yeah. On a day.
And sometimes even in that moment, it's hard for people to make that connection to it, right? And sometimes the assumption is, it's like, well, you got to work past it. You got to do all those other type of things. And it's always interesting when people say that to me or somebody like you or somebody like him.
Yeah.
Like, that's what we do. That's what we've always done.
Right.
Like, we're pretty good at it, in fact.
Yeah.
But it's not about getting over it. It's about getting through it.
For sure.
But getting through it means that there's still an obstacle there. Why? For what? Can it be moved? Can it be diminished? Can it be changed? Can there be a path created? Why would anyone ever make a case to keep it as it is versus improving it, when clearly improving it will put this entire country in a better situation?
Well, but the case for keeping it as it is because there's nothing wrong with the person you're talking to, right? Or at least
from their perspective.
From their perspective, the way they feel about it is everything's going right in my life. So why would I even work to change anything for anyone else? Because everything's going right for me. It's going right for my children. As a matter of fact, my great grandchildren are set up for success. Yeah. So that's the generational curse that we are trying to break. Right?
Yeah. Well, now let's talk about it, because one of the things for me is do work. You got to do work. You got to put the work in, and that's one of the most disheartening parts for me. Is we're trying to move this forward amongst and change the narrative within ourselves, within our community. Right. Yep. Again, we have a Leaders of Tomorrow community. We fight every cohort to get 40% diversity. We want it to be up to 60% or better.
Right.
We went out and go get the money to do the things. And, we just had a session last night, and the majority of people who didn't show up, but you can guess what color they were.
Right.
And there's a part of how do we start to get people to show up for ourselves? Now I get the backdrop to it, right? And all the histories, XYZ, they haven't seen it come from it, right? Mm-hmm. But one of my biggest frustrations is, especially when I hear commentary like people are just supposed to get a seat at the table or be in a room because of their color. Mm-hmm. Do work, right? If you're white, you don't just get to be white and then all of a sudden you get to be in a room. You got to do some stuff to get in the board. Sometimes. But you know what I'm saying? Yeah. And that's one thing I appreciate about you is, again, like, at the end of the day, I don't care what anyone feels about Julian, which you're not going to accuse him of that man don't go get busy.
For sure.
He don't do work because, again, a lot of it, if not us, who?
Yep.
Right? And I'm not going to sit around, every ounce of energy I spend complaining it is a waste of energy. I could be moving the thing forward. But how do we start to advance that to say we have to help our brothers and sisters to say this takes work?
Yeah. So this comment might ruffle a few feathers within our own community and outside our own community. But I truly believe we need our own strategic plan. Like, we need to be on the same page as Black folks. Right. Mm-hmm. And we can't get there because we don't want to communicate with each other. Right. And you want to talk about proper and effective communication. We want to yell and scream at each other. We want to say that this person thinks he's better than that person, just because they're doing the work. Right. Mm-hmm. And someone else is not, and somebody's getting shine and somebody's not getting shine. And so for me, that's what's holding us back. Is like, let's just sit down. Let's have our own conversation. Let's build our own strategy within our own community. Get on the same page for us. And then we can go out and say what we need to do. But one of the things that you also talked about, you were very vulnerable in the moment about LOT and how, was it 60% diversity?
We 40 to 60 is the goal, but we struggle to get to 40. Yeah.
Right. So 40% is your goal. So I recruit for my state organization. And one of the things that I always tell them when they ask me, how can we get more people of color in the room? Say it. Like, point blank, period. Say it. If you don't say it, people will never know. Mm-hmm. Right. That's number one. But also, if you don't say it, people feel like they're not welcomed. Mm-hmm. So just go out and say, hey, this is where we want to be. We're not there. Be vulnerable in that moment. I guarantee you Black people like vulnerability just as much as anybody else. Mm-hmm. Right?
That's true leadership. All those things that make humans
It's the human element.
You know,
it's the human element.
Well, we tell a lot of folks ask us to do stuff on D&I. We always tell them we do it through culture. I'm not interested in there and just exchanging code words and just giving people definitions to things outside of saying, how do you create a foundational environment where people are treated well, humans are treated well? That's the first skill that you have to have. Like, you know, if a pie doesn't taste good, it ain't gonna taste better if you slice it.
For sure.
So if our base situation is not being able to take care of people, not being able to communicate, not being able to support people in general, you're not going to be able to appreciate me specifically.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so that's one of the things that just getting people there, which we're not in a good space. And so for me, it's not even just about having work ethic as a person of color. It's having a work ethic, period. That's going to have a lot to do with your quality of life, period, is whether or not you show up and you participate. I don't outwork Black people. I outwork most people.
Yeah.
That's why certain things happen and certain things produce. It's getting people to buy into some of these general concepts, because that's why the burden is always difficult when you're a change agent. Any disenfranchised group is going to struggle because of the fact it is so hard to unify people, especially people who want to approach things from a spectrum. There's people in my life who would like for me to be more militant. There's people in my life who think I should be more passive. There's people in my life who think everybody has a different, you know, and we talk about this even, that a lot of times people don't appreciate. A lot of the reason why people wanted to talk to Martin is because they didn't want to have to deal with Malcolm.
For sure.
And so sometimes having different perspective helps move one thing. But when you got so many switches and so many levers to pull, it's really difficult to get people together and vote on how we should handle something and the tone that we should take in our communications. And so when you're going against the status quo that doesn't need to coordinate, that doesn't need to work together, because there's a natural collusion that happens by keeping things the same if you benefit from them being the same. It's very hard to challenge that. So in a world where getting people on the same page is near impossible. Like, I mean, we can go on a Twitter rant when it's aimed at one person.
For sure.
But like getting people to show up to the meeting.
Right. That's the thing.
Is the trick. How do we work through that?
Well, I think it's all about foundation. First, we need to understand that our foundation is, some people say our foundation is shaky. I say our foundation is not there. We don't have a foundation. So what do we need to do to build the foundation? I think we look at the people, again, that's doing the work. People that are in the rooms, people that are not in the rooms but behind the scenes. I can point to one person individually, Harriet Yoakum. She's been in the room. She's been doing the work for umpteen years, right? You, the same thing. You've been doing the work since you've been in high school, right? Our community, the Black community, needs to look at those individuals as the leaders that they actually are because of the work that they're actually doing, instead of going to TikTok, instead of going to YouTube.
Well, you just said it too, though, because I want to bop on this, because you just talked about that. But again, we tend to, in many instances, put the most pressure on the people who do the most.
Yeah, because the shoulders are pretty broad.
For sure. So how do you get to a point where those people are pulled closer to the greater community and they're really mentors or whatever, versus you can hoop or
for sure.
You can make music.
And I don't know if you can, because broad shoulders are put on us for a reason. I mean, again, you look at Malcolm and you look at Martin, they died young, right? Because they had so much pressure on them. I mean, listen, the reason why they continued to climb is because people engage with them. And so I think that's what's missing for us. It's like people are not engaging. They did die young, but are you afraid of that? So I asked you a question the other day at the guest list, right? I can't remember the exact wording, but like, are you willing to die for your people? And your response was, no, but I'm willing to live for my people, right?
For sure.
I'm willing to live for my people. Why can't people see that?
For sure.
So that's my thing. I don't think we can ever force anyone to see your true value. Nobody, right? I mean, you can't even force your parents and your spouses. Nobody will ever be able to see your true value.
Nobody.
So I think the same thing happened with our leaders like Malcolm and Martin. Nobody ever really saw their true value, which is why some people mess with Malcolm, some people didn't. You know what I mean? But they understood who they were. And so as leaders, I think as we continue the work, as long as we continue to understand our value, then we just have to continue to put the weight on our shoulders, because it is what it is. It's the life we chose.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. For a lot of reasons why we see that crabs in the barrel mentality is because they don't know who they are.
Yeah.
Right. Again, when you're confident in who you are, I've never in my life seen a confident person tear somebody else down. right? And so that's that introspection of that. And in the vein of Black History Month, when I asked the question, who amongst all of our great leaders, we have a saying at Think 3D, how dare you not be great, right? And, I'm wearing my shirt here that's got a lot of the leaders on it, right? So when you think back to history books and those things, who is somebody that you're inspired by? Who's someone in history that really fuels you, and what is it about that person that you feel like I got something? We get it from everybody, but specifically a person that gave you something.
So just because it's in my lifetime, I'll go back to Obama. I can remember, I don't remember the exact time, but I want to say it was either 8th or 9th grade. I was making that transition into high school. And I can remember seeing his speech, the one at the Democratic National Convention, the one that went viral, right? Yep. Viral before viral was a thing. And I looked at my grandfather, because we were actually at my grandfather's farm. And I looked at my grandfather, I looked at my mom, and I told him, I was like, that man's going to be president. Like, as soon as the speech was done, I knew he was going to be president. And that's what started making me feel like I needed to be more engaged in the space of politics. And we kind of talked a little bit off camera about shifting the language, or shifting the focus from talking about Black power all the time to talking about Black politics now. And so for me, he shifted my entire direction. I went to school, background in biology. I'm not doing anything with that degree. You know what I mean? I'm not doing anything with a biology degree.
Nothing with that biology.
You know what I mean? Right. So, because that's not what I really wanted to do.
Right.
The money was great.
Yeah.
I mean, it's good to call yourself a scientist, but what are you doing with it? What are you doing with the work? And so for me, I always reflect on what he was doing in the community at the time. Now, obviously, things changed once he started to climb the ladder. He became senator, and then he became president. His focus changed, his responsibilities changed. But when he gave that speech, my man was in the trenches, right?
For sure.
He was in the trenches.
Really doing it.
And that's where I wanted to be. I wanted to be in that space. I wanted to be respected by my people, but I also wanted to be a leader of my people.
Yeah.
And so I started to shift my focus, and he had the heaviest impact on me.
Perception is funny because in 2006, when he, around that time, I wrote a song, and one of the lines was, "What if Black people decided to vote? We wouldn't have a Black president, but at least we have hope." That's how foreign the idea of having a Black president was. It was bonkers to me. So even with him, I was like, yeah, okay.
Right.
Never.
Yeah.
And then he became a president, and he ran on hope. And it was like, all right, okay.
Yeah.
All right, yeah.
But so here's the thing, going back to kind of where we were even before then, talking about how we all need to be on the same page. Man, he got elected, and Black people were like, well, he ain't really Black.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
No, there's always
There's
always a
Black.
caveat.
It's always that. Or he's too light skinned, or what? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
there's a lot of that's a real challenge is needing people to be pure. You know, for me, it's all of the people, but more different ways. You know, I think people just think about some people as general figures, but for me, when I think about Fred Hampton, when I think about James Baldwin, when I think about Dr. King and Malcolm X, I think about those people in terms of their ability as orators and writers. I tell people all the time, like, if you want to last, like if you want your name to carry on significantly, you got to be an orator or you got to be a writer.
yeah.
If you can't speak or you can't write, you're going to be vapors in history. And when people have the opportunity, like, again, in a world where people try to dominate with power and weapons and tools and all those other type of things, for a person to be able to use their voice, their intellect, to be able to change the dynamics of one of the world's most significant superpowers, you know, and really the world, really.
For sure.
You know what I mean? The world in its entirety, but specifically this country. So for me, it's more the way. And you pointed it out earlier. I do think it's important that we pull in more relevant heroes, more relevant people. I remember as a young person too, I'll just say this real quick. I always wanted to meet Colin Powell so I could apologize. And the reason why I say that is because I used to see Colin Powell because he was Republican. I used to go in on. And there was just one day I just started navigating through a story and just thinking about what it would take. And I'm thinking about the stuff I was overcoming here in just a little dash of the experience.
Right.
And I'm thinking to become the chairman of the Joint Chiefs in that military, not even like in this military right now.
In that one.
In that military.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like what this man had to endure was just crazy for me. And that was one of the first moments where I had to step back and appreciate how I was adding to the toxicity of this thing without understanding this person's story.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And what this person had experienced. And then for me also is Maya Angelou again on that orator speaker type situation. And she was important for me because she was not only such a powerful force that way, but she was one of the first women, and particularly Black women, that I looked at and I was like, I want to be like her.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like we appreciate it. Women, like my family is a matriarch. So like the women in my family are the figures. So that's not weird for me. But it was like, that was the first time like where I was like, I want to be like her, and the gravitas she has is just otherworldly.
Real quick, I just want to touch on that because most Black families have that power structure, right? Most families in general have a power structure, but Black families in particular look to the moms and the grandmothers within our families because they are, they're the ones that actually hold the power, right? If your mama say no, that means no.
Yeah, in my house,
don't go ask your daddy because mama said no. You know what I mean? You will get laid out. So yeah.
For me, one of the significant ones is Muhammad Ali. I think even especially since we started Think 3D, you know, I have a poster up on my wall that says, if your dreams don't scare you, they're not big enough. Mm-hmm. And I think back to, and especially when you get to be appreciative as an adult, what he sacrificed. Like he was in his prime for what he believed in. But one thing that I really appreciate more than all of that was the audacity to be who he is. I am the greatest. He said it before all of it. And in a world where I think one of the biggest things that we are dealing with in terms of issues with each other is people's insecurities. Again, if a confident person doesn't tear people down, it's an insecure person that does that down. And in a world where even my personal mission in life is to inspire the world to step into their higher potential, he was such an example of like back in the 60s, like you can, if you believe it and speak it, like he believed that.
Yeah,
like he wasn't put on a show. He believed it.
All the way.
All the way.
And if you told him otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where, and I see that because even in my journey, and that's something that, you know, I've always been a pretty confident person, but in this version of me, I'm able to do all that I do because I don't need no one's permission. I'm not trying to please anybody. I know who I am. And from that standpoint of confidence, you can impact the world, which I want to give kind of last topic before we wrap is really going forward, right? I think we talk about Black History Month, and ultimately with Black History Month, you know, how one of the ways that we can you think about the next generation, how do we make it live and how do you make it matter for them so they keep taking the power from that? And I think one of the ways that you make history matter is making it matter in the moment, living the example, right? You teach through the clarity of your example. So as you think about, you know, this next generation, I'm inspired. I feel like it's a more active generation than even our generation. There's more that we're handling a pile of shit basically in the world to deal with that they got to figure it out. But what are some of the ways that you feel that we could make sure that they understand where they came from, but to feel empowered and not to wait to say the world is yours now. Yeah. Go get it. Go design it. Go create it.
So man, this new generation's different. I'm just gonna say, bro. I'm just saying, like, listen, they thought we were different.
Yeah,
they gonna have to deal with something.
Yeah,
because this new generation does not care at all. Yeah. And I'm not just talking about the Black kids. I'm talking about all the kids.
They you know what I mean?
Yeah, they really about that life. And so if we don't set this particular generation CEOs up to handle what's coming in, then I think our generation will fail. I don't think that generation is going to fail at all, right? Because they got their stuff together far beyond and above what we did. Now,
we interact with them differently too.
For sure. Now, with that said, though, is there a lot of room to grow? Is there a lot of room for mentorship? Absolutely. We have to stand behind them. But they're not a generation where we got to hold their hands like we were, right? I needed somebody to hold my hand through the process, navigate me through the rooms, teach me how to build relationships. Nope, not them. They don't need a relationship, right? And so when you talk about what we can do, I think we can just continue to work in the spaces that we're working in, making sure that we are ready for the next generation of workforce, the next generation of leaders to come in, because they're coming whether we like it or not. It's almost like I kind of liken it to the movement in the 60s and the 70s, right? Those young kids saw Malcolm, they saw Martin, they saw the change happening, they saw the dogs being sicked on a lot of black people, right? They saw the water hoses being put on the folks, and so in their mind, they weren't gonna do that. You won't do that to me, right? So if you think about the kids growing up in the late 60s, early 70s, I mean, I don't know how old y'all are. Y'all older than me. I was born in the 80s.
Oh, you want me to say?
Y'all was born in the 70s, right?
I was not.
Oh, he
79.
was. See,
I'm seasoned player. So
you see.
I'm fresh.
So anyways, those kids though, the reason why you see so much change in our generation is because those kids said we're not going through the same struggle, right? And so now these kids are seeing our generation go through a struggle of police brutality, right? I wore this hoodie today on purpose because of Trayvon, right? I was going to wear, I got a whole bunch of Black History shirts, but I'm like, you know what? I'm going to represent Trayvon and them. I'm going to put on the hoodie. Those kids saw that. And so in their mind,
see everything.
They see it all because they record it all.
That's the difference.
That's
they
the
see
difference.
Everything. Like there's a lot of kids that was like, even white kids or whatever, where when George Floyd happened, it was like this?
Yeah.
This what y'all was talking
Yeah,
about?
exactly.
It was like, oh, no, this can't go.
Yeah.
And it was jarring for them in a way, whereas when you talk to somebody that was older, they're like, man, that's a Tuesday.
Yeah. Because it's been happening for us.
Yeah,
like we know
that's
behind the scene it's been happening. But because they see it, because they're the ones actually recording it, they're pressing the button to share it, right? They're making the thing go viral. They're also saying it's not happening when I get there, right?
For sure.
So we have to prepare ourselves for that.
I think for me, the difference is, and it's interesting, because I wouldn't have thought about it like this, and you mentioned that, we got to get together and all of that, but what I found is that a lot of the value, because I'm a person that's been, developing young people for a long time in some capacity, I take that role very, very seriously. And most of the people I've developed have been white, but obvious for natural reasons. But what I found is really interesting though is that for a lot of the young Black men that I lead, especially in football, but in a lot of things, so men and women, but in particular, let me just use football for an example. It means something specific for them to see me lead while I'm also leading white people. You see what I'm saying? Like, it's something to be said where it's not carved out. It's not over here. That's the leader.
Yeah.
Of this thing.
Of all people.
Of this whole thing.
Yeah.
And seeing people in that space and seeing people be that, you know what I mean? Because Dr. King was ours, and then once he died, he became theirs. Malcolm X was ours, and then once he died, he became everybody's. Well, yeah. Well, no, but like now, like again, you wear an X, sweatshirt or whatever. You be out in the streets, you might see a kid at Berkeley for sure rocking the X joint. Like that was not happening.
Right.
Both of these men were some of the most hated in America when it happened, and later they became, whatever. A lot of figures of however you want to slice that. But I think that in the difference between what Obama was, he's the leader of the most powerful country in the known world.
Yeah.
Period. Which is why people had to do a lot of caveating, which was not my president, because you don't want to accept the fact that this is being led by whatever. But that was a different thing. Even for me as a person at my age, that was different to see a person in that place. You know what I mean? And so I take a lot of ownership about young people in particular being able to see us run a business that is powered by more than just our audience.
Yeah.
Our business is engaged with everyone. We lead in these segments that we lead in fully.
Yeah.
Not segmented, not carved out, not cut out, not put over here, not a version of the thing. And I think that's important. I think a lot of folks are seeing that and are coming up with an audacity and a confidence. The nuance of what has happened historically naturally diminishes.
Yeah.
But that confidence and that willingness to achieve and that belief that you could do whatever is increasing. And we got this window right here where they're kind of crossing each other, where we get to offer this context and offer this leadership.
Right.
I just think we got to really take advantage of that moment. I think that moment's happening right now.
I mean, the world is full of imagination, right? And so while you were talking, I was just imagining, though, Like the things that we're already doing within our own organizations is very powerful. But imagine if we had the support of our own people behind us.
Huh.
Right? Use that imagination and imagine what type of power now. Like that's true power. That's true politics, right? Because let's just be real. Entrepreneurship is nothing more than politics making money. That's it.
You got to work the
you got to work the relationships. You got to work the leverages, all the things. So what happens? What happens when that 40% that you're aiming for in LOT automatically becomes 80% over and over and over and over again? And now you have that foundation that we talked about earlier of our own community, building our own businesses. I mean, that's powerful.
It is.
Yeah, that's my most optimistic part looking forward. Obviously, as these young kids grow up, one of the most important things for me is you teach through the clarity of your example. Because, again, when they see us and they see that they're doing nothing but repeating the same behavior, they're gossiping and doing all the things because they see their mama's doing it, they're going to repeat the same behavior. And so as we start to own and elevate our own part, I can't control the next person, X, Y, Z, but when we hold ourselves, Vaney always talks about personal responsibility all of the time. And when people truly take personal responsibility, for ourselves, but then knowing that generation behind us, that's what we're doing. Malcolm and Martin and all, they led the way of moving the needle forward. And I think knowing that we have a generation that's different and they're willing to be activated differently.
Right.
But are we showing them the foundation, as your point, again, building a foundation to come from so they can not just step forward, but to leap forward? It's time, right? But it all comes back to us.
Yeah, for sure.
100%. And I think a prevailing theme is really still leadership. How valuable it is in this country and all of those different type of things and what it means for us to lead in these moments, whether it's, leading our own or leading us all. It's funny too. I just think about that. I just think about how many people, when we think about leaders of tomorrow, what you're doing with the hub, helping people get businesses and things of that nature. And those people go out in the world after going through those experiences, having it with this wide group of people, knowing that they want to live in a more honest, open, compassionate, considerate, and thoughtful world. And so while we have to build ourselves up in our confidence, is also equipping people with the skills to be better people.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we ask people to be better people than their skills would allow them to be.
Yeah.
And if you don't close that gap, you don't close that gap. Like I talk about those young men in football or whatever it is that I've led that might be white. Can nobody tell them about their coach?
Yeah.
When they get in the world and they in that position, and then this kid over here that went through this thing and that you led, and this kid over here that he led, and they get together and they say, man, what are we doing? Why would we do it like this? I like you, you like me. You smart, I'm smart. You want a good community, I want a good community. Let's get this thing popping.
For sure.
And that's what I see really transpiring. I think it's already happening right now. I think we just are at a point where we all want to get out of this rat race. We want to get out of this dog eat dog. We want to stop cannibalizing each other. I think we all want to be in a place where we can feel good and we actually live for the purpose of a quality of life.
Yeah.
And that's the only thing that you really get out this ride.
So just maybe this is the last note. I don't know if we're trying to wrap it up or what, but I think we have to really be cognizant of how long progress actually takes.
Man.
Right? So people want progress to happen overnight. And it's not going to happen that way. You have to remember that we went through over 450 years of whatever type of oppression, and now we're in a different era of certain types of oppression when you talk about systematic stuff. So the progress we're making, typically progress takes 2, if not 3 times as long, right, to happen from the actual oppression or the setback that has occurred. So if we think about it, we're 1,000 years in the making, right?
100.
So this is baby steps. This is baby steps for sure. We are infants in this game.
Yeah.
MLK, Malcolm, they were infants in the game.
Yeah.
So we have to.
We're doing pretty decent.
I mean, we are doing pretty decent, right? Considering.
All things considered, for sure.
All things considered. So with that said, though, we also have to realize that as leaders, as the people that are actually on the ground, what they say, in the muddy boots or in the trenches, like we have to remember that we might be working for things that we might not see in our lifetime.
Oh, 100.
Right?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, 100.
And I really have found value in understanding that my kids' will probably reap the benefits of my work.
100.
I'm not working for my generation.
Oh,
for sure.
I'm not.
Hard facts.
And so I think people that get involved in community sometimes they see, oh man, this is not going anywhere. Well, it's not for you.
Yeah, you
It's
gotta
not,
strap
the
in.
work is not for you. It's time to strap up and let's get moving.
And you gotta take care of yourself because it's a
Right.
long. It's all journey.
Yeah,
There
for
is
sure.
no there. It's all journey.
For sure.
So you
Yeah.
know.
And what are the options?
Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure. Yep.
Didn't work. So
But I think that also means, kind of going back to what we talked about earlier, what you said at the guest list as well, that means living for your people,
100%.
right?
Yeah.
That is doing the work. That is the ultimate sacrifice. The ultimate
100%.
sacrifice is death, right? But
Yeah.
next to that is living for your people without
the
seeing the
easiest
benefit.
sacrifice is
Yeah.
death because
Yeah.
it's a wrap. You don't gotta live
Absolutely.
with your decision. But when you gotta get up every day, you gotta live with your choices. You gotta live with what you
Yeah.
do, whether people like them, don't like them, they got opinion about them, don't give about them, whether they work or they don't work. That's the hard part is getting
Yeah.
up every day after you made yesterday's decisions
Right.
and having to deal with them things.
Yeah.
Just dying, you get to be done, and that's the thing. We've chosen to do this work, and we don't ever get to be done.
Yeah,
yeah.
for sure.
So great conversation, thinking out loud. Make sure you guys subscribe, check out more episodes. But again, this brought to you, Black History Month is not just a month. Let's make it 365 and live it
You know
out.
what I'm saying?
American
American history.
Build confidence in yourself and be the best version of you. Impact the world. So see you guys on the next episode.
Appreciate you.